Hello, everyone. This is your host, Akil Jabbar, and welcome back to another episode of SaaS District. In today's episode, we'll be talking about boosting time management, productivity, and inspiring SaaS performance. Today, we have our guest, Brian Saunders, joining us. Brian is the founder and CEO at BigTime Software, a cloud-based software for professional services firms that provides software and services to help accountants, architects, engineers, IT service management, and management consultants budget, track, and build their most important asset. BigTime Software has been ranked one of Inc. 5000's fastest growing companies in America for 2 consecutive years. Brian has spent more than 20 years as an executive thought leader and consultant within the tech sector, growing successful SaaS-based companies serving from industries ranging from communications to human capital management. Prior to BigTime Software, Brian founded one of Chicago's leading software consulting firms in the 90s, DaVinci Software, which was later ranked one of Crain's top software firms in 2000. So welcome, Brian. Super excited to have you on SaaS District Show
That
today.
is a mouthful, Akil. Thanks for having me on. That we put it all together like that. I'm looking around for that guy.
It definitely was. So for those of you who maybe aren't as familiar with your background, can you just give us a little bit, about your background, past ventures, up until funding and running as CEO as BigTime Software?
Yeah, you bet. I kind of grew up in product, as you mentioned. I grew up in the '90s when the product was exciting and it didn't exist as a discipline. So we would come into either startups or even Fortune companies in Chicago or in the Midwest, and it'd be a product or an idea and a market, and we'd try to get the two of them to fit. And later on in the kind of the late '90s, we got brought in by a lot of boards, to look at a product that they were excited about, but for some reason it wasn't getting any traction, and help us either shift the product, shift the focus, whatever. And a lot of the stuff you do in UX today, we did back in the '90s. We lots of interviews, lots of conversations, and that typically led to a bunch of just hard development work. And that was kind of my history. We were a consulting company. We grew to probably 70, 80 people from 3 or 4, subleasing at the time from my wife, who also is an entrepreneur. And I had a business partner at the time, and he was great about talking about it. He said, looking back at it, he said most of the way he put it is most of what we learned about how to manage a services firm, we learned just through brute experience. It was just, you figure out like, oh, that's why you need to track AR. Oh, okay, that's why utilization is important. You learn these really hard lessons and process and people, how to manage, how to grow, what a stack looks like when you add people in a services firm. So we did all that. And we ended up selling the company in 2000 to like a WinPoint Partners venture, and then took a break for a year or two while the market settled, and started doing this kind of consulting with BigTime. At the time, we called it Edison's Attic, and it was basically, hey, is there a way for us to use systems and consulting to give these smaller firms, growing firms like us, access to the kind of tools, these service automation tools to manage people and manage process and help people learn and keep track of where you're at with a project and a budget. And we probably did that for, 10 years or so. I probably worked with 2,000 or 3,000 firms in that space, and just small growing firms in the industries that you outlined. And that kind of led us down the path to this, to BigTime. We went to a bunch of trade shows, and a bunch of people said, who's Edison's Attic? And we said, BigTime. And they said, oh yeah, I know that software. So geniuses that we were, it took us about 10 years to figure out maybe we should name the company BigTime. And that kind of coincided with this joint venture we did with Intuit to help them with accounting practice management, and our first funding round in something like 2011. And then since then, BigTime now services about 2,500 customers in the industries that you outlined. We're great in AEC, architecture, engineering, construction. We don't do hard hats, but we do a lot of architects and engineers. Management consulting. We work with a ton of those guys. IT services is another area that we get big with. It's basically any firm that does project work. That any firm that does work that's got a snout and the tail, and the snout's exciting, the tail's terrifying, and I got to keep track of how all those puzzle pieces fit together. That's where we really come in and help them manage that with software in the cloud.
Very cool. And so you guys mentioned you guys had that initial joint venture round with Intuit. Was there anything else? Have you guys raised additional funding after that, or did you guys stay kind of bootstrapped? And then where are you guys in terms of you said 2,500? What's the size of your team?
Yeah. We're about 2,500 customers, about 100 people. We cracked 10 million in ARR last year. We're kind of trending toward 50-60% growth. That's kind of where we'd like to be. We're not trying to get 100% year over year, especially in COVID, but we're happy with that. The round that really kind of started us down growth equity, we actually closed in 2019. So we did a small kind of Series A round with guys I know in Chicago in 2011. And just kind of, sat with that and self-funded and kind of bootstrapped, if you will, up until 19. And then we figured out, hey, we really have the opportunity to scale here. And we looked around for a long time to find partners that would allow us to augment the growth that we have today with things like acquisitions and moving into new markets. And that's where we wanted to find kind of experienced private equity. It was less for us about at that time, 2019, it was less about the cash and more about, finding a board that wasn't tired. In 2019, we had a board that had been around since 2011, and they were like, okay, I don't have anything else to give, and so we wanted to go out and find somebody who knew that kind of $10 to $50 million range in terms of growth. And we ended up getting an investment from Wavecrest Partners out of Boston.
Oh, yeah.
Two really smart partners. Our guy, Vaibhav Nawalia, is an ex-Vista guy, and his partner is an ex-bank guy, and they kind of got together, and I think they might be on fund 2 at this point, but they have a ton of operating experience and connections and stuff, so it was a good fit.
Yes, we're very familiar with the guys at Wavecrest. Question for you on that decision you made in terms of deciding to raise that round. You said you didn't really need the capital. There's always that thought, right? It's like, we don't really need it, but looking back now, do you think it was worth making that decision of did you actually see that kind of incremental growth? Did you see that value add beyond just the capital?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's always nice to have additional capital. It makes you braver. You're gonna make certain decisions that are much more conservative if you don't have millions sitting in the bank. And it's especially true during COVID. It's a lot less stressful 2020 for us because there was capital in the bank. So stuff like that, you can never say capital doesn't matter, but, we weren't burning. It wasn't a life or death kind of either, turn on the spigot or reduce the company size. So for us, we brought in guys who just know this path. And I talk about this all the time when I do conferences and stuff with people who run professional services firms. We work with thousands of them. And so over time, you see patterns, you start out being really great at being an architect. And then at some point you hire a bunch of people and now you're an organization. And there's this shift that occurs when there are kind of 10, 20 people where suddenly the growth path isn't about project work. It's about actually managing people. You make this shift from thinking about projects and customers to thinking about the people you're hiring and process and training. And that same type of pattern emerges for companies like us, for SaaS companies. And so you find a private equity firm that has seen the movie before, and they can kind of help steer you. Hey, here's what it's like to scale up sales and marketing. Here's what it's like to scale up CS. Here's timing. Here's the kind of DNA of the people you want to hire in a given set of positions. Here's 7 different people you can talk to if you really want to partner and go into that market. Like all of that stuff they've seen before, and so it just makes the decision easier. They're not. It's not like we're mixing rocket fuel over here. We're managing professional services firms, but you'd rather not have to make the same mistake everybody else makes and then learn from. They can just accelerate it by making sure that you understand what the pattern looks like.
Yeah, that's a good kind of.
It's tough. I talk periodically to people that they want to bring onto the portfolio, just CEOs who have been through that before. And one of the conversations I had recently, the guy said, why do you hire a CFO? Like, I do the books myself. Why do you do a CFO? And we had a half-hour conversation about how our CFO, who's just been through this game so many times, he's done acquisitions, he's done 10 to 50, I think 2 or 3 times. It's not like he changes the decisions we make, but he makes it so much easier to understand when and why we should make them, Peter can take care of the metrics in a way, he can slice and dice the metrics in a way that really helps us drill in on, all right, so what does the next hire look like? Where's our gap in training? What do our customers really look for? What do they start with? Where do they end? And so he's out there looking at numbers in a way that I just would never have time or patience or the inclination to do. And that type of talent really changes your strategic direction.
100%. And that's kind of like the beauty of they basically run an analysis and paint a nice picture of what's really going on in terms of trends, changes. That's kind of like the role of an engineer, right? In financial wizard
It
as
is.
well, right?
It really is. You know, it's the number of times I wandered. Peter's literally next door. I can bang on that wall and he'd come in here. The number of times that I wander in there and ask him a question, and he says, "I don't know. Let me look at the number. Let me figure it out." And then he'll do this analysis. Like, great. So I can ask a question about, how should we grow in the Midwest? Like, who are we really good at recruiting? When do we get most involved? And then he can come back and tell me in, a day or two, and it helps us make a better decision. So that type of thing is what I think growth equity brings to the table if you find the right partner. If you're looking for, Wavecrest was not the best offer on the table when we were looking for a partner, but they were far and away the smartest operators.
Yeah, that's important. That's an important part of it. Super important. In terms of the product itself, why the decision to narrow down the scope of the tool? Because that's always that battle as well, right? People are like, I can serve anybody. You guys had accountant, architect, and engineers, IT services, consultants. Yeah. And was that something
my guys who bill their time?
Yeah. Was that from the beginning, or was that something like over time, like at the initial stages?
That's a fair question. Well, it's been a lot of water under the bridge. I would say we've been focused on that vertical from the beginning, but the temptation is to be very horizontal in B2B, right? You look at the kind of unicorns in the B2B space that, Slack, even in my little space, acquisitions for anything from T-Sheets to Reich, like these are very horizontal apps that could be used by anybody, right? And so that the negative about that is they could be used by anybody. And so even those organizations, when you look at how they grew by looking for a specific industry to penetrate. And so I really, I'm kind of old school. I have a, 2 or 3 kind of standard approaches to business that I take. And if it doesn't fit, then I'm not interested. And one of those processes is establishing a beachhead via industry. And what that lets you do is it lets you get really deep into a specific workflow. You brought up in our kind of pre-conversation about how do you compete against these big, because there's some big companies out there that are doing this type of stuff. Salesforce gets involved, QuickBooks gets involved. Those are billion-dollar public companies with massive engineering teams and opportunity and ability. And the question is, how do you compete against them? And that answer is, look, you have to find a niche, whatever it is, where you can be number one. I don't care if you're a 5-person SaaS firm or, us, a 100-person firm growing to 350. You still have to find the niche where you can claim number one and then build on that, And so for us, focusing on those industry verticals meant that while QuickBooks is phenomenal at managing your accounting system, they don't know anything about how to manage an IT services firm. And they don't want to. It's a $1 billion organization. He needs $100 million in revenue just to hit his growth number. Like that, just to hit his nice job number every year. And so, our little bit industry it's too specific for them to get involved in. And so you compete against these really larger players by finding a niche like that and exploiting it. And if it's a fantastic niche with some growth opportunity, you have a nice chance to create a disruptive advantage.
Quick question on top of that. Well, if somebody's thinking, because I always, make that suggestion as well, focus on a few niches. Would you suggest they start with one? Would you say, go try 2 to 3 and then see which one actually sticks? Or are you starting with, 4 or 5 at the beginning? Do you have a framework on how to tackle that?
Well, you kind of know it when you know it. Like if you're a product person, you know when you've made a connection. It's funny. I had the guy at Intuit that I work with, Aaron Brady, who's phenomenal in product. He's gone on to do a bunch of other things, but he's brilliant. And so we would go and sit with these accountants and kind of walk through what we were doing together. And I probably sat on 50 or 60 either phone calls or face-to-face meetings with Aaron. Go into some guy's living room in Las Vegas and literally watching hours. And at most of those, he'd kind of sit and listen and nod. And then at one point, we found a way to deal with workflow differently. So accounting firms are weird. It's more ERP than consulting. Imagine, a 10-person firm with 2,000 projects and they're all due on the same day, right? That's a tax firm. And so the workflow is super important. Like getting it through the channel is super important. So we came up with UX that would help them with that workflow. And you could see people the demos, people would start to grab the mouse and, they're really interested and they have a ton of suggestions and suddenly that they get animated. And once we got to that, Aaron said, oh yeah, okay, but now we have something now we're cooking. Right. And so I think you want to explore a niche deep enough that you can get that kind of visceral response. Then when you get it, pour a little gas on it and see how deep you can go.
Love it.
So that might be like your exploration of a niche does not have to be a giant business plan where you're going to go after a niche. Like, don't do that until you know that, or if it's a massive investment that requires that kind of forward thinking. But it could be as simple as we're gonna try it with a few web pages and a ton of conversations, and we're going to spend a few months and see how deep we can get and if we get any traction, and then just double down on the traction.
Right. No, makes perfect sense. Do you have any other challenges you could say you can share, over these last few years? You've been around for, doing this for quite a while in terms of growing, BigTime Software. Yeah. That's not what I meant. I meant you're a young man. Did you have any, big challenges you'd say, in terms of staying afloat before you guys raised any round, or were you guys, pretty, consistent growth year over year since the beginning?
I've always been more cash flow focused than kind of growth focused. I get that there's this kind of, now they talk about it derisively, but it's really not. I don't think it's fair. I think it's just a different philosophy, that this kind of valley mentality of growth at any cost, right? And sometimes that makes sense because they're basically saying, look, we're charging through the forest. We're not going to spot how to convert this to revenue until we get to the point where we have X or Y, and we've got money to throw at it. Our constricted resources is traction, right? So let's go find it. But for me, my resource, my kind of limiting agent has been capital. And so we've always tried to grow the business capital efficient. And you have years where that's just not possible, and so you scale back a little bit in terms of growth. So we've always sacrificed kind of growth and market penetration to just making sure that we run things capital efficient. It's actually weird to have. I had a conversation with a British guy last year who was looking at the company for a bunch of different reasons, a private equity guy, and he's really irritated that we have so much cash on the balance sheet. I don't understand. Like, you're growing cash. You just got an investment. Why are you growing cash on the balance sheet? I'm thinking, I don't think anybody's ever asked me that question before, but it makes sense. It's a different mentality. For us, it's always been, what can you accomplish with the resources you have in place? And so, look, if your growth rate is 10 or 15% and you manage to do that because you only have a certain amount of cash in place, I can sell that story all day long, right? To somebody who's now going to pour fuel on the fire. The issue is you can't sell that story if you run out of cash. And so, so you need to set goals for yourself that you can accomplish with the resources that you've got in place. That could literally be the 40 hours a week when you're starting out that you might have in addition to your regular job, and the 10 grand you got from your father-in-law. Like, resources are different for everybody, but what you want to do is find a goal that's realistic within those resources. And then it's all about traction. What traction can you get? What milestone can you hit with that resource? And even when you're starting out in SaaS, angel investors, they're goofy. Your goal is to get to what's the next milestone. And if you can really clearly define what the next milestone is, even if that milestone is pre-revenue or if the milestone is, not quite the right, kind of investment size, but you can paint a compelling picture for why you could use this resource to hit that milestone. It just lets everybody focus, the whole team can zero in on hitting that milestone. And then now pivots become, gut wrenching, because you had a milestone, everybody agreed to it, people put money in it, it's not going to work, we got to pivot. But that's all right. That's that's why it's called work, right?
Yeah. I mean, having those constraints really just kind of forces you to make a lot better decisions. I mean, you just can't afford to make blow the cash and see what happens. You have to be kind of efficient with your money. How do you kind of change
the snotty way of saying that is that venture capital firms are really good at making really great small ideas into really terrible big ideas. And it's just, sometimes you need calendar time and you need stuff to bake. And if it doesn't have time to bake, it's going to come out all weird, right? So, being capital constrained can sometimes be an advantage.
And so, I mean, from your perspective today, I mean, now you're saying I have a lot of cash in my account. How do you stay disciplined to not go out and say, okay, now that I don't have all these, constraint, cash specifically being one of them, how do you stay disciplined to not go out and say, hey, we can go and acquire another company, or, because you're still growing 50-60% year over year, but you could also add fuel and, double your team, and decide, hey, let's do that.
And I've had plenty of, at this point, I've met most of the CEOs in my industry and adjacent industries, and there are plenty of those folks who have gone off the rails because of exactly that. Listen, you got to surround yourself with like-minded people. If you're like growth at all costs, we're going to, burn a bunch of cash, and that's the direction we're going to head, and we're going to grow something huge. You better find investors that agree with that, right? And the hardest thing to do when you're talking to people who are going to put money into the company is to try and figure out, all right, we probably spent 8 months finding Wavecrest, like talking to a bunch of people, taking every phone call, getting a feel for like-minded investors who, even though they've got cash behind them, look, we want to build this capital efficient. I think that growth rate makes sense. Here's 4 things you haven't thought about. Maybe we could help you with those. Like finding somebody who's like-minded, who will stick to the same discipline is really important. True with your team. So, just because somebody's a rock star in a given field, whether it's product or CFO, we're just talking about, if you can't find senior executives who are like-minded in terms of your, keeping you disciplined, then, you'll go off the rails. And the problem with that is not that it's bad to burn cash. If you've got cash in the bank, if you're trying to grow a company, like I said, there's nothing wrong with that philosophy, but you're not used to running that track, right? You're not used to being in those woods. And so suddenly you're in a whole different set of, the metrics are different, the people are different, the approach is different, the definition of a milestone is it's different. And if you're not used to being in that space, if you get out of your comfort zone in terms of what your discipline is, it can lead to problems.
Expectations are a lot different too, right? And now you have a different, different level of pressure and how you operate. And maybe it's not for you. Not everybody, wants to operate like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So you mentioned the team. That word I think is super important. You mentioned, brilliant teams are built and not bought or borrowed. Can you elaborate on what that means? And what are you doing in terms of, a culture or management to develop a brilliant team at BigTime Software now at over 100 employees?
Yeah. It's a fair question. It's probably the chief responsibility and struggle, I would say, building a team, because you want to grow fast. So you're going to have to hire outside talent. For us, the key is hiring outside talent that can help, our existing talent grow. And, the reality is some folks don't want to grow in the same way that you do, right? So of course you're going to outgrow people who were great team members when you were, 5 million that are not great team members when you're 25 million. That's fine. That's cool. It happens all the time. People are excited about being in a certain space. It's especially true in sales and marketing, where people are just used to pitching companies at a certain size, and then the company gets bigger and the responsibilities change, and they have to focus on 7 different balls, and people don't like that. They kind of self-select. So Godard Abel at G2 does this whole presentation on what it's like to grow a company and the cutoffs and stuff. He's an engineer at heart, so it's very it tickled that engineering funny bone in my head. But I think you do outgrow people. You can't keep everybody, but truly great leaders within your organization are going to have some history with the organization. They're going to understand the nuance. The longer you keep them, the more they understand that nuance. And as long as, you're all agile, meaning that you can learn the new rules of the game when the game changes, that the understanding that nuance is hugely helpful in terms of pushing the company forward. So for us, it's all about when we top people, hire people who can help our existing staff accelerate. Don't just top people because the position is open. We have to find people who are going to be rock stars in that space. So we're willing to wait for that in order to find rock stars for the space that we're trying to hire. And then what's the training program? What's the career path? What's the plan? And a lot of that is literally sitting down with your people, the key employees and others, every single quarter, and trying to figure out, all right, well, we said you wanted to be here. Where are we? What can we do? How can we give you space to accomplish that? What kind of training can we make available? Where are you frustrated? And is that still the plan? Is that still something you're interested in? A lot of that is just shoe leather and getting in touch with people and kind of connecting and making sure that you understand it. Periodically, it's, we have a person who's a brilliant product manager here at the organization, and she's awesome. And she grew up in our support team. She grew up years ago answering phone calls from customers and helping them understand the product. And so she just has this, 2 years or so of experience of hearing the problems that people have and the frustrations and where the product doesn't make sense. So then when she got into kind of QA and product, we slowly kind of, hey, this is a great career path for you. Like, you haven't thought about product and it's not something that's on your radar, but you should go get certified in these 3 things. And so you kind of, over time, ideally, can help spot where somebody just has an affinity for a given skill set, and then, encourage that with training and some outside resources. So your worst case scenario is that you train somebody up and they go work somewhere else, but that's awesome.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, look, we use Slack here. We use it a ton. 15 years from now, I promise you, no one at this firm is going to remember what Slack is. But if you're lucky, they'll remember the person that was their manager who helped them move up. And so there's your opportunity to make a lasting impression on somebody 15 years later. That's why you're here. You're not here to solve problems and get, check-in points and close deals. I get it. That's what you do every day. You're here to help your fellow employees advance. You're here to help the customers that we work with actually grow and hire more people and get bigger. Like, those are the things that people remember. They're not going to remember the day-to-day stuff, the to-do list.
Yeah. It's always gut wrenching, right? When you're, top employees, after you groomed them, invested so much into them and they leave. But then you have to also look at it like, this is like, your child moving out, they've grown up, they're adults now, they've nurtured them, you've taken them, and now they're ready to move on to the next
level.
And
again, I'm an old man. The number of times that somebody has done that and then come back to me, 5-10 years later and been really helpful in some way, or just sent a note when you're like feeling like you can't manage your way out of a paper bag to say, hey, I'm using that thing that you taught me. I'm whiteboarding exactly the way that we did back in the day, like, okay, all right, so I'm not doing this for nothing. So, it does pay dividends. You just have to approach it the right way. And especially in this labor market, this is a crazy, weird little market. It can be frustrating, but you have to remember that you're investing in people, and that will eventually return. Whether it returns to you or to your community doesn't really matter. Your goal is to help kind of improve their capability and advance their career.
Yeah. A quick note from our sponsors today, and we'll be right back. Being a great manager has never been harder. The relationship between employees and their managers is the key driver of workplace productivity and engagement. We believe with the right tools, managers can be exceptional leaders. WorkPatterns is designed to make team management easier than ever by enabling continuous one-on-one feedback, collaborative meetings, goal tracking, and workflow management all in one place. Whether you're a manager struggling to stay on top of things or a CEO whose organization has outgrown its systems, visit workpatterns.com to see how they can help. Now, back to the show. When it comes to kind of, talking a little more about the productivity side, and, once you have that team, do you have any recommendations for, say, SaaS founders? You've been doing this, you probably remember even from the initial stages when it comes to developing and building that strong, productive team. Do you have any tips to maximize team productivity, but also being careful on activities that may, do the opposite effect?
Yeah, that's the hard part, right? Like the number of people who, people get frustrated by turns. And, I get that you have to pivot periodically, but if you're pivoting every week, then that's problematic, right? And so, you have to be cognizant enough of your team to let them get their work done, which ultimately means you have to have faith in them to get their work done, right? Like, you have to give them room in order to achieve. That doesn't mean that everybody gets to have, a set of goals for the year and then go away, right? And so I think the big leap, and this is true in our customers too. We preach this to our customers a lot. You got to get into a cadence, and it can't be an annual cadence. It's got to be, quarterly is great, monthly is great. Having kind of weekly meetings where you're accomplishing small stuff. You really get productive when there is a cadence, and the Agile kind of teaches you that, right? Like, the developers are like, yeah, no kidding. And of course, you need a 2-week cadence where you get stuff out. You can't have a project plan that lasts 2 years and then expect that you'll achieve anything. You need to narrow it down into things that bite-sized things that can be bitten off and accomplished within a week or two. And so every firm is a little different with cadence. We tend to be a little dictatorial with our customers, right? Like, we push them to be into a weekly or into a monthly, quarterly cadence just because that tends to be how they review projects. But whatever yours is as a SaaS organization, get together every period, have goals that are reasonable. You're going to be terrible at figuring out what you can accomplish within that, whatever that finite period is. Let's say you decide every month we're going to have a set of goals. You're going to be terrible at setting monthly goals. But after the third or fourth month, you should actually be pretty good at it. Maybe you hit 80% of them, right? You're never going to hit 100% because some of them are no longer valid. But if you can get to that kind of 70, 80%, now you've figured out what size goals your team can accomplish. That type of velocity, that type of regular cadence is what separates truly great teams from just kind of mediocre teams. You can always hire talent, right? But to get everybody coordinated, everybody needs to play together. We all need to have goals that are coordinated in a time frame and a cadence that everybody agrees to, and everybody can kind of operate at that rate.
Yeah. So that's on the team side. And then what about yourself as the CEO and business leader? How do you maintain your productivity, improve your own goal setting, and making kind of those empowered decisions and strategic directions while still, effectively leading and inspiring your team? Do you have any tips or tricks?
It's a good question. When you're smaller, and even today, even at 100 people, as the founder or as the CEO, you kind of have an idea of where you want to take the organization, right?
Okay.
And the reality is that's kind of what grew the company to where it's at, wherever it happens to be. I don't care if it's an idea on a piece of paper. You have kind of a vision for where you want to take it. Now, you might need some practice executing against that vision, but eventually, as the CEO of the company, people look to you to kind of make decisions that are consistent with the vision, right? Like, I want to be a great product person. I want to be a great CFO. I want to be a really great, head of CS. I don't want to have to worry about where we're taking the company. My job is to make sure that when we're all done, when we all execute on our cadence and we get to where we want to be, the company we built is a company we can be proud of. And sometimes that requires you to make these decisions that aren't necessarily clear to everybody in the room. And the reason I bring up decisions is because specifically as a CEO, you got to try to avoid relitigating them, right? Like, you're going to have decisions where the team doesn't necessarily all agree, right? Once you make the decision and you're going to charge in that direction, it's okay to be wrong, but you don't want to relitigate the decision every time you get together. I mean, the number of teams, so I sit on a couple of boards, and the number of teams that are insecure about a decision they've made, whether it's strategic or tactical, and they just relitigate it every week. Like, you had this conversation last week. What are you doing? Like, you've already made that decision. So okay, we're going to stick with this for a quarter and we're going to talk about it again. That's the decision we made, right? As a team, that's what we decided. And you just lose so much energy constantly kind of relitigating the same decision. You got to get that. If you eliminate that, you'll save a boatload of time as a leader.
And do you have any
dictatorial? It does mean that at some point you have to just make a decision and go.
And do you have any specific, maybe tools or strategies or hacks or even a framework that you can share on how you make kind of better, A, make better decisions, and B, maybe increase your productivity?
Yeah. It's difficult to get to that cadence, that conversation without a metric in place, whatever it happens to be. And, again, I'm not mixing rocket fuel over here, but when we have a problem, when we have a thing that we're trying to address, I typically let the team hash it out. So let's say that we've got a backlog of people who need to get up and running. But we close, between 50 and 100 new companies every month, right? So we have a lot of people who are new to the system at any given time. And our goal is to watch and make sure they grow, make sure they're getting into, adopting the product. And so if we have a backlog, we had one a few months ago of people getting into the system. I kind of let the CS team hash it out. Like, tell me what the plan is. Let me know. We'll make sure it's working. Give it a week. Give it 2 weeks. Okay. What's the metric? Let's find a number. How many customers are in that state? And every day or every week or every period, just tell me what the number is. And you'd be shocked at how it's just put a number in front of it. Whatever that number happens to be. Sales is good at this because they're used to it. Development is good at this because they're used to sprints, right? The rest of the world, not as good at it. But you put a number in front of people that's a number they can control, and the number you're going to look at, the number that tells you whether it's successful or not successful. And you'd be shocked at how quickly that number moves. And it's a pattern, right? Like, hey, what's the number? I don't know, 42. What's the number tomorrow? 42. What's the number the third day? 4. Okay, why is it still 42? And now suddenly, just almost imperceptibly, it turns into, it's still 42, but. And then, hey, it's 41 because. And now it's 38 because. And now we're, like, slowly but surely the number gets down to 0, right? Where you want it to be. And right. People kind of self-correct. When you have to slack that number to the CEO every day, all right, suddenly you want to put a little descriptor in there if it's paused. And before you put it, you're going to ask people, hey, I'm going to report the same number 3 days in a row. Why is that? Right? So it kind of naturally corrects itself, but you have to have something people can rally around, and celebrate. If it gets to 0, everybody has to go out and have a beer and be excited about it and celebrate, right? So without that number, you're kind of like, you lose track of the fact that you solved the problem.
Love it. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's just like, going to the gym or whatnot, right? If you're not tracking your weight or your calories or whatever, I mean, you don't really know where you're going.
Think about that. Like, I'm terrible at working out, but it like when you're training to do something, when you want to get a certain number of miles a week, or you want to get a certain number, or you want to get a whatever the lift is, like, all right, you're focused more. Whereas if you're just going in 3 times a week to check the box, all right, well, you're not going to make much progress.
Yeah, that's why I got my watch here. Same thing. Like I actually now pay attention to it. I'm like, oh, I only have
for not
a
giving
couple
me
more
a sports
stems.
analogy, by the way. That's awesome. I like that it was lifting it.
It all adds up. It's the same thing. It applies everywhere, right?
Right.
So, you obviously have a unique perspective, building tech companies, producing, cash flow, focusing on cash. And obviously you built a product that customers love if you're going kind of at that speed. Do you have any, recommendations or to kind of the new generation of entrepreneurs when creating and building maybe their next SaaS company that, you've learned from and think they can inspire to apply as well?
Well, I'm terrible at investing. Like, I'm really good at finding product that I'm enamored of, but it's typically never what the market is enamored of. So like I remember zip drives once upon a time, and I thought they were the greatest thing since sliced bread, and I just completely missed digital storage. So I'm not the Silicon Valley type where I can spot what's coming around the bend. I do think if you're kind of a little bit more Midwestern and you're trying to grow things in a cash flow positive way and capital efficient way, probably focus on what you know. Like you're going to be involved in a specific problem, whatever that problem is. You should have an intimate understanding of the problem. When we built BigTime, remember, I grew up making every mistake in the book, building a services firm from 0 to 80 people. It was difficult. And so I knew the problem intimately. I don't think I would be successful if I didn't. There are product people who can do that, who can devise a solution to a problem that they haven't experienced personally, don't have an intimate knowledge of it, but they do it, the good ones, by making 1 million phone calls and by sitting in front of 1 million people. You have to know the problem intimately, and then you'll be like Aaron in that meeting with an accountant. You'll see the faces light up, and you'll spot it. Okay, that's it. That's the thing. And now you get some successes. You develop some traction. The pitch is so much easier when you go out to find funding to really scale up, because you can tell stories like that. You can talk about the problem specifically instead of having an investor ask you, what big problem do you solve? You should be leading with that. Like that should be right out there. Here's the problem. Here's the cost. Here's the total market. This is why it's important. Now let's talk about the solution, right? And so the more intimate you are with the problem, the more successful your solution is going to be. And then the second piece of that is, I talk to a lot of people who are Chicago's big startup community, right? So I get a lot of emails and phone calls from people who are starting up and kind of investing in the market. And I'm not a big fan of giant business plans. I'm not a big fan of lots of the number of people who talk themselves out of an adventure, who strangle themselves with a spreadsheet, right? Because they just can't get the numbers to work. You got to roll up your sleeves and try it. You're going to trial and error, and you're going to pivot. You just want to make sure that what you're working at, you're putting so much energy into, the market is big enough that it can handle your big dreams, right? So I get that there are, the famous test case of Uber, completely underestimating the size of the market, right? Like everybody goes to that presentation, but at least they did the work to say it's big enough. It may be bigger, may be huge, but this thing that we're reaching for is big enough that it's worth the effort. So between those two things, a problem I know and a solution that where if we get it right, it's big enough that it supports my dreams, that's all you need. Then just roll up your sleeves and get started.
Love it. Brian, I want to shift gear a little bit to kind of go a little bit more on a personal level. Yeah, it's about to get serious here. What's one piece of advice you wish you had known and would tell your 25-year-old self?
Boy, 25. I was not as smart as people are today at 25. They've got podcasts like yours to learn from. I think the stuff that we have been talking about so far are lessons hard learned, right? Like there is a certain amount of being smarter about the size of the opportunity, being smarter about spotting patterns. Like it took me well into my 30s before I figured out, oh, you know what? Other people have done the same. Like I don't have to go out and reinvent the wheel every time we come outside. Like the first thing I do now is pick up the phone and call 40 people to figure out what LMS system are you using, what works, how do you implement it. Like there's so many people who have gone through this before. You want to surround yourself with people who can give you quick answers to problems that are not core differentiators. Like how do you build a sales team? Look, do not reinvent that wheel. There are tons of people out there who are really smart about building a sales team and when it's appropriate. There are certain things that are rocket science, fine. We do a lot of high velocity sales and there are a lot of people that are good at that, but there are people who are good at that. So now you just want to figure out how to network to them and see if you can, solicit their help. It's the worst thing you can do is not pick up the phone at 25. Like I have a 19-year-old son, 20 actually, and that's the thing that I struggle with whenever we talk. Hey, pick up the phone. You got to talk to people. If you're really passionate about that thing, there's probably 4 people in the world that you'd love to talk to. Call them, email them, send them a note, try and link in with them, like ask them a question. Most of us, I'm not going to sit down and review your business plan, but most of us are happy to give advice if we have something that's relevant to what you're trying to accomplish. It's not a sell. You're genuinely looking for advice, and you have a ton of people who say no. That's fine. They're busy. Move on. Find somebody who knows and ask the question. Get out there and network and find folks who can help you go faster.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how many times that works. I mean, simple, any problem you're solving, right? Whether it's a big decision and you're just not sure. I've done that countless times. I just, found some people who've maybe already done this, and I've done it several times, and just sending them an email, sending them a tweet or a DM, and hey, I'm having this issue. This is what I'd love to chat. It seems like you're an expert in this. There's experts in everything these days, right? And they do this day in, day out. So why try to figure it out on your own, right?
Yeah, and it's funny because a lot of guys don't, or women don't realize they're experts. It's like, oh, okay, well, I noticed that you did these 4 things, and I'm curious how you did it. And you'll ask the wrong question. They'll assume that steer you in the right direction. I mean, I think I kind of figured that out because we had so many conversations in both rounds of funding with people who were investors, and then take every call, talk to them, ask them, put your strategy in front of them. Like, this is how I want to grow. What do you think? If they're great, if you're talking to a partner or even a principal, like they'll tell you where you're wrong. I mean, they'll tell you the pattern that you're not fitting. Like, I don't know. If it's big and hairy and you're way off, then they might say those numbers aren't adding up to me. But most of the time, you have a conversation that will move you forward a little bit.
Yeah. Brian, what are some of the biggest challenges you're currently facing in order to continue to grow your firm? What's keeping you up at night these days?
Yeah, it's funny. I still obsess over product, right? So I thought about that. What keeps you up at night? I get that question a ton, and most of the time it's something small, and most of the time it's product related. My head of product has to hate me, or her husband hates me, one of the two, because I'm assuming that nobody's online at midnight when I ask the question, and then she'll pop up and say, like, "I'll look tomorrow." Sorry about that. So I still obsess over product a ton. These days in 2021, I think we're in a really, really dangerous labor market. I think there's a little bit of a prisoner's dilemma going on, right? Where I recruit your people and you recruit my people, and we slit each other's throat. And at the end of the day, it's bad for everybody. It's bad for companies. It's bad for employees. It's bad for us, nationally. So I think it's a really tricky labor market. And so solutions to that problem that don't involve cannibalizing the city of Chicago and other growing companies, I think that keeps me up a ton. We're trying to make sure that we raise up talent and raise up the city and not try and kind of be corporate raiders and beat each other to death. Plenty of opportunity out there. And I think the tendency in the labor market today is to rely on, a recruiting engine that frankly is outdated and irresponsible. And so I think especially in this year, it'll probably fade in 22 or late 22, early 23. But in this labor market, it's a pretty dangerous time, for communities. And so that kind of keeps me up a little bit at night.
Are you guys only hiring on the local area in Chicago, or do you guys hire remotely?
No, actually, we just opened an office in Phoenix, so we're trying to staff that up a ton. We're interested in hiring in a couple of other locations in the U.S. In particular, Boston, DC. Those are markets that we're trying to break into with physical presence. Obviously, most people today are hiring anywhere, right? Culturally, I like the fact that we have an office people can come to and see each other. Like I said, at the end of the day, your goal as a big timer is to help other people advance, and whether that's a customer or another staff member or your fellow workers or your managers, like your goal is to help them. That's your mission, and so it's hard to do when you're in Slack and on Zoom calls all day. You need to be occasionally face to face and see the reaction that people have when you give them a task or when they succeed or fail, and celebrate with them and comfort them when they don't succeed. So for us, that physical presence is really important. So those kind of 4 physical locations is the plan in the U.S. We initially thought in 2020 we'd expand to London. We'll probably reopen that once the world reopens. But for now, we're trying to focus on making sure that in the US we have decent physical presence in those geographies.
Right, 100%. Yeah. So I mean, if anybody listening in is looking for a new career change and looking to join Brian, check them out, and they're hiring and looking to grow. Brian, who or what are some of the best 3 resources? It can be books, people, mentors, or people maybe you follow, who'd say they've been the most instrumental to your success over these last few years.
But it's funny that changes over time, right? Like you have certain periods of time where some things are really helpful. There's 2 books that are foundational to my approach, right? Like, and they're old, but if you're in SaaS or you're in software, I feel like you should read them. One of them is Crossing the Chasm, that Jeffrey Moore book, and don't read the cliff notes on it. Go out and get the book and read it. It's a short read. It's quick. He wrote a bunch of other stuff too, and I'm sure you'd get pissed if you heard it. But I feel like that's the seminal work, right? Like that's the one that really changes your thinking. It helps you approach a market differently, right? It helps you look at the beginning of a market and say, all right, well, what does success actually looks like? Right. So that's super important. And then Innovator's Dilemma is a much misunderstood and maligned book. But if you read the original, if you go through it, it's thick and dense. But if you kind of go through the original and really understand what Christensen was saying, I think it really helps in software to understand how you can develop a comparative advantage against these huge, giant organizations. And innovative, kind of disruptive innovation doesn't have to be technical. He studies, I don't know, disk drives or something, and it's very technical. Steam engines versus hydraulic. It's goofy, but it can be structural too. What we talked about before, the head of QuickBooks has to have $100 million in incremental revenue just to hit his passable number at 10% growth, right? So because of that, they have a structural impediment against approaching something where you could build a $20 or $30 million business. That's a big business for entrepreneurs. You could do really well in that space, and structurally they're prevented from getting into it. And so that if you read Innovator's Dilemma and broaden your mind about it a little bit, those 2 together are super helpful. And then I have no idea. You said 3?
Yeah, you have a 3rd.
This is a good question. I grew up in political science, right? So most of my outside reading is, I don't read business books. I just can't have a business forum, So I think there's a lot of kind of decision theory, what we talked about before, where look, everything in the box is equally rational. Kant talks about it a ton. And as long as you make a choice within the box, just make a choice and move forward. It's better than sitting around and trying to find the perfect solution. So that comes to play a lot. But I tend to not get into business books a ton. There's a bunch of marketing stuff that I've read recently. There's a story narrative that I thought was really helpful in terms of outlining your specific problem and involving your customer in the story as opposed to just talking about yourself. So some of that stuff is really helpful for marketing. I don't know. If you really think about it, I can imagine
that's cool.
10, but they're usually little papers by somebody who's written something. The guys who we work with, our partner has been really helpful too. The private equity guy, just because he's been through this a million times, and so it's helpful to have somebody who is a lot more thoughtful as opposed to focused on the spreadsheet. And I'll call V and say, this is a problem I'm struggling with, and he'll say, okay, got it. And then 2 days later, he'll text me back, hey, talk to this guy, and I talked about your problem, and he thought he might have a fix for it. And so that type of resource I rely on a ton. It's helpful to have that kind of partner. Yeah,
100%. The first book you mentioned, it kind of gave you kind of framework of what success looks like, from a different perspective. What does success mean to you today, from either personally, financially, business, life? There's no right answer.
Yeah, right. It probably changes every day, just like everything else. I have 4 kids, and so you think a lot about their success as opposed to yours. Honestly, like at some point you shift from thinking about closing customers and increasing revenue to building a company that you'll be proud of, right? And so, I think for us, for me specifically professionally, I think, BigTime will end up growing to be really big in the space. We're already number 1 in PSA. That's awesome, and obviously we have revenue goals. We want to win. It's still you still have a competitive nature, right? But at the end of the day, when you get there, especially in today's environment, make sure you're building a company you're proud of. Make sure you take time out to say, all right, well, wait a second. Is this really the group of people we want to be? That's true, by the way, when you get a ton of pressure right now to ditch your offices and go completely virtual and not have people have any interaction. And make sure that when you play that out in the long game, that's the company you want to be. There are advantages to that. There are huge positives for that. There's an opportunity for you to lift up communities that you're not a part of, right? Like it's a big opportunity beyond just finding people to do the same job cheaper, right? You could really have an impact on a community where you are not physically proximate, right? But make sure that at the end of the day, when you do that, that's the company you actually want to be. And for us, if 5-10 years down the line, BigTime is $100 million SaaS company and kind of the leader in the space and, the undisputed leader in kind of time and expense and billing, awesome. But what kind of company is it, right? Like, I don't want to run into an Uber problem where we're building a huge company, but it's not the type of company we want to be, right? And so that's the thing that I think really defines success for me at the moment.
Is that your goal, 100 million, or do you have? You don't have a specific target before you move on?
It always changes. I can't see around the corner, right? So when we first made this investment, I thought, okay, well, 20 million is a reasonable goal for us to get to. And then when 20 million is in sight, you're thinking, okay, well, what does 40 or 50 look like? And I'm positive, right now we kind of have our eyes on kind of that 50 to 70 million time frame, and just because you can see it, you know what I'm saying? As you climb, you can see the next peak and think, okay, well, it's at that I can get to. But then once you reach it, it's a whole new level. At some point, it's going to get big enough that I just don't have the expertise to manage it. That's not my gig. And somebody else will come along and be the new CEO, and I'll get to watch him or succeed. But for now, I think we're probably focused on getting to that kind of 50 to 70 million and developing a presence in the space. And we'll be happy with that.
Love it. That's an awesome goal. Thank you, Brian. This has been super great. I appreciate everything you've shared with us today. Just to kind of wrap it up, where can founders listening in get in touch with you, learn more about you, BigTime, or just say hi?
We throw stuff on I throw stuff on the blog all the time. So take a look at BigTime.net. My email is bry@BigTime.net. So feel free to send me a note if you want to get a hold of me there. Or you can access me on LinkedIn. One of those three. At some point, you'll be able to get a hold of me. And if you're in Chicago, I do periodic speaking and kind of conference events here as well. So feel free to stop by and say hello.
Sweet. Awesome. I appreciate you jumping on today. Really, really nice chatting with you, Brian.
You bet, man. Loved it. We'll talk soon.
Cheers. Thank you all for listening in to this episode and joining SaaS District today. Don't forget to leave a review and subscribe for future episodes where we interview top leaders in the SaaS industry. If you're a SaaS company looking to grow and unlock the true value of your business, get in touch with us at horizoncapital.com. And myself or one of our consultants will provide a free assessment to help you get there and hit your goals. If you have any feedback or suggestions for this podcast, please DM us on Instagram or LinkedIn at Horizon Capital and help us improve our content for you all. Thanks again and hope to see you on the next one.